was King of England and Ireland at just 9 years old. He was crowned on the 28th of January 1547 and was king until his death in 1553. Edward was the only legitimate son of King Henry VIII. His mother, Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, died just 12 days after his birth. Symptoms of tuberculosis first appeared in Edward in January, and by May it was clear the disease would kill him. Before his death, he consulted with Northumberland. Edward decided to exclude Mary and Elizabeth, his two half-sisters, from the succession and put Lady Jane Grey and her sons directly in line for the throne. On the 11th of June, an informant in the king's household reported that the matter he expels from his mouth is sometimes greenish-yellow, sometimes black, often pink, like blood. Now his doctors believed he had a suppurated lung tumour and admitted his death. As a result, his legs swelled to the point where he couldn't stand. He lost his strength to resist the disease. In his last public appearance on the 1st of July, Edward displayed his thin and wasted condition at his window in Greenwich Palace, horrifying those who saw him. Edward died at the age of 15 at Greenwich Palace at 8 p.m. on the 6th of July 1553. His cause of death was unknown and rumours began to spread of poisoning, so a surgeon was instructed to open Edward's chest after his death. The surgeon found that the disease whereof His Majesty died was the disease of the lungs. Edward was buried in the Henry VII Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey on the 8th of August 1553. Edward's burial place was unmarked until as late as 1966, when an inscribed stone was laid in the chapel floor by Christ's Hospital School to commemorate their founder. Henry Stuart, or better known as Lord Darnley. Lord Darnley was an English nobleman who was the second husband of Mary Queen of Scots and the father of James VI of Scotland and first of England. From his marriage in 1565, he became King Consort of Scotland, having claims to both the Scottish and English thrones through his parents. Darnley was killed less than a year after the birth of his son at Kirkhofield in 1567. Just before his murder, Darnley was recovering from a bout of smallpox. He was described as having deformed pox upon his face and body, whereas some believe he actually had syphilis. Queen Mary brought him to the old provost lodgings at Kirkhofield to recuperate. While Mary was away, two explosions shook the foundation of Kirkhofield on the night of the 9th and 10th of February 1567. Later, it was determined that the explosions were caused by 2 barrels of gunpowder placed in the small room under Darnley's sleeping quarters. Darnley's body and that of his valet, William Taylor, were found outside, surrounded by a cloak, a dagger, a chair, and a coat. Darnley was only dressed in his nightshirt, suggesting he fled from his bedchamber in a hurry. However, the cause of Darnley's death is still unclear. Even though there was no visible marks of strangulation or violence on the body, John Knox claimed Darnley was smothered. A post-mortem revealed internal injuries thought to have been caused by the explosion. John stated that the surgeons who examined Darnley's body were lying and that Darnley had been strangled, but all the sources agree that there were no marks on the body and there was no reason for the surgeons to lie, as Darnley had been murdered either way. Prince George was the husband of Anne, Queen of Great Britain. He was the consort of the British monarch from Anne's accession on the 8th of March 1702 until his death in 1708. 12 of Anne's 17 pregnancies resulted in miscarriages or stillbirths, 4 infant deaths, and the death of his chronically ill son, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, when he was just 11 years old. They had a strong marriage despite the loss of their children, and he was buried in Westminster Abbey at the age of 55 after suffering from a recurring and chronic lung disease. Founded as a monastic community in 654 AD, it became one of the most significant medieval abbeys in the country. In 1118, the building of the cathedral began to replace the monastic church. This wall is what is left of the monks' dormitory and refectory. The refectory is where the monks ate their supper in silence, and after all the work and prayers they retired to their beds in the dormitory around 2 a.m. This part of the wall is thought to be around 900 years old. Catherine was the first wife of King Henry VIII. She was Queen of England from their marriage on the 11th of June 1509 until their annulment on the 23rd of May 1533. As long as she lived, Catherine would refer to herself as only Henry's lawful wife and as England's only rightful monarch, and her servants would continue to address her as such. Since she was the widow of his brother, Henry denied her any other title but the Princess of Wales. Catherine died at Kimbolton Castle on the 7th of January 1536. News of her death reached King Henry VIII the next day. It was rumoured that she was poisoned by Gregory de Casale at the time. Anne Boleyn miscarried a boy the day Catherine's funeral was held. There were rumours that Catherine had been poisoned either by Anne or Henry. Rumours of her poisoning were started after a black growth on her heart was discovered during her embalming. Modern medical experts agree that her heart discoloration is not due to poisoning but to cancer, an undiagnosed condition at the time. Catherine was buried in Peterborough Cathedral with a ceremony in recognition of her status as Dowager Princess of Wales rather than Queen. Mary, Catherine's daughter, was forbidden to attend her funeral by Henry. The Reverend W.D. Sweeting, in his 1898 History of the Cathedral, stated, "The only monument, strictly so called, of which there is any record, was a low table monument raised on two shallow steps with simple quatrefoils carved in squares set diamond-wise." This is how Catherine's tomb at the time was described. However, on April the 16th, 1643, Oliver Cromwell's troops vandalised the tomb. Catherine Clayton, wife of one of the cathedral canons, organised a national campaign for all Catherines of England to donate 1 penny to the cause in 1895, which led to the current memorial slab being installed. After Mary's execution, Elizabeth refused her request to be buried in France. In late July 1587, her body was embalmed and placed in a secure lead coffin until she was buried in the Protestant service at Peterborough Cathedral. During the embalming process, her entrails were removed and secretly buried within Fotheringay Castle. In 1612, King James the Sixth and First ordered her body to be exhumed and reinterred at Westminster Abbey in the chapel opposite the tomb of Elizabeth. Her tomb was opened to determine the resting place of James I of England in 1867, but his remains were found with Henry VII. Old Scarlett is somewhat of a local hero. The gravedigger, Old Scarlett, died in Peterborough in 1594, aged 98. It is reported that he buried people from each household in Peterborough. Given that the plague broke out in 1574, this accomplishment is plausible. The reason he was buried in the cathedral was that he had buried 2 queens, Katherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, and Mary Queen of Scots. Old Scarlett was believed to be in his 90s when he was called upon to dig Mary's grave. It is debatable if Old Scarlett was the inspiration for William Shakespeare's gravedigger in Hamlet. Having dug so many graves for other people, Old Scarlett finally had one of his own in 1594, just 2 years before he turned 100.